Thank you. We'll continue with the service with the chanting of the Vandana and Tisarana. It can be found on page 96 in your service book.
And I ask that everybody chant along with me through all parts of the Vandana and Tisarana, both the parts that say leader and Sangha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Homage to him, the exalted one, the enlightened one, the supremely awakened one. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami. I go to the Buddha for guidance. I go to the Dharma for guidance. I go to the Sangha for guidance. Namo Kie Butsu. Namo Kie Ho. Namo Kie So. Gasho. Namanda, 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 namanda.
And thank you. And now we will have our EITAIKYO Dharma message from Reverend Landon Yamaoka, or Yamaoka Sensei 2.
Okay, I meant to come up and reintroduce Reverend Landon briefly, but apparently I brought the wrong paper with me, so just like showing the wrong video or everything else, keeping in that theme today, we'll just roll with what we have. I really do appreciate the difficulties of giving a Dharma talk, and in this case, Reverend Landon is not in charge of his own AV material. His slides are over on a different computer being run, thankfully, by Bill Teague, and he can't see the screen, and so he's trying to do his best under the circumstances we've presented him with, and I think it's the Dharma Talk Challenge here in BTSD. But we really do appreciate being able to hear some new thoughts from a minister who I don't think very many of you had an opportunity to hear speak before. So I hope you're enjoying some of his ideas of how important EITAIKYO is, but using a theme and a message that isn't just talking to us about chanting and how important chanting is and making us all chant, chant, chant this whole time. So here again is Reverend Yamaoka 2.
1 second, sorry. Again, would you please join me in Gasho? Shantao, alone in his time, clarified the Buddha's true intent, sorrowing at the plight of meditative and non-meditative practicers and people of grave evil. He reveals that Amida's light and the name are the causes of birth. When the practicer enters the great ocean of wisdom, the primal vow, they receive the diamond-like mind. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandas, 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 namandas. Hello, I'm back again. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I apologize for all the tech stuff. The original plan was that my wife and I would spend the day hanging out yesterday and doing whatever we would find throughout the day, but we had to change our flight because I'm not sure if you've heard about Glenn Kometta's passing. So Glenn Kometta was the minister assistant at my temple as a child, but I was always scared of him. So it wasn't until we didn't have a minister for a period of time, and I was doing a lot of conferences at the Jodo Shinshu Center, that he and I started talking. He came to me, I was gonna stay away from him. But while I, of course, went to IBS and Glenn was the manager there, so we changed our flights to take the second to last flight out last night. And I think with the funeral being as big as it was and just being stressed out because I didn't know some of the stuff I was supposed to be doing, I didn't fall asleep till like 3 last night because I was just, you know, when your adrenaline goes, you get into work mode, and I apologize. I'm usually a little bit more put together, not much, but I appreciate your patience, and I hope that, I hope that you feel the children were able to get something out of the Star Wars talk. So I'm going to keep within that theme, give you a little bit more of a academic-y, doctrinal thing, nothing too heavy, but the plan is to try to relate it to my experiences in being an anthropology major and how to view things through different cultural lenses, but also some pastoral care stuff that I've learned through the Institute of Buddhist Studies, because I've done the Jodo Shinshu ministry side, but I've also dual majored in, Buddhist chaplaincy, but of course chaplaincy is always non-denominational to some extent. So I hope that you can bear with me a little bit more. And I know we started late, and that was also my fault too. So if you are or are not familiar with the Gosandai, or the quote that I read, this comes from Master Shinran Shonin's Shoshinge, or Hymn of the True Shinjin in Nembutsu. And you can find this if you have the collected works or the Kyogyo Shinsho, which is the teaching, practice, Shinjin, and realization of the true Pure Land path. It's in the chapters of practice and Shinjin. I assume most people don't want to go read this. It's hard for me to read it. But if you were interested, read the second volume, because that was made for probably people like me that aren't so academic. CWS 1 is a hard read. It's still rough for me. But I chose this line because personally, I feel something when I chant this any given time, but especially if you've ever heard the Gyofu style where it's more melodic. This is the Zendo section, the first kind of break. And when I'm the Chosho or lead chanter, I would be chanting that line, and the melodical notes that it hits, I would say it's spiritual or it's profound, but something touches me, and I feel, even if I'm stressed out and I'm tired and I don't want to be chanting, it's usually at that time where everything resets and it's like, okay, you're a priest, you're a minister, you're supposed to be chanting, but usually it's that melodical point where I start to feel something through the chants, and I'm not sure if anyone else has that feeling or not, or has experienced that. So our founder, Shinran Shonin, is referencing Master Shandao, one of the 7 masters that he pulls his take on Buddhism from. And they're talking about Amida Buddha's true working as the light and the name are the causes for our birth in the Pure Land when we pass away. So we as the practitioners are able to then enter the great ocean of wisdom, which is the primal vow, the 18th vow, why we say the Nembutsu. And through that, we receive the diamond-like mind. So I believe that this quote, or Gosandai, is showing how the compassionate means from Amida Buddha is able to reach and transform us. And of course, yes, there is an ultimate form of transformation that happens within the Pure Land after we die. And maybe this is borderline not as doctrinal, but obviously something. Was that me? Sorry. something happens to us while we live in this life as well. So Reverend Smitty informed us in Hyobakumon, or dedication, why it is that we chant for our loved ones who have passed. And I think all of us here can say or know how fortunate we are to have a temple where we can come to learn the Dharma. We can learn Buddhism. Reverend Smitty talked about their idea of a river with many tributaries flowing to have brought the teachings to us in our past, all of us here today, and of course, those who hopefully at some point will come to the temple to learn about Buddhism. And we're getting benefits in the past, today, and in the future as well. So the last slide that I showed the children had Yoda, and I think he might have been meditating, and you see little force ball lights of Qui-Gon Jinn. Oh, is it on the computer? Kind of floating around him. So in the Gosandai, Shinran Shonin describes the light in the name as causes for birth. And in the slide, we see Yoda with his old friend Qui-Gon Jinn taking on some aspect of the Force as he is now part of the Force, and he's being manifested by energy or light, and is instructing, but literally guiding Yoda to a place to learn how to meditate and grow his own connection to the Force. I appreciate this series as, again, we're able to get more of a backstory on the characters, but it also provides overall in the Star Wars universe myths, mystical aspects of the lore that we wouldn't have necessarily gotten in some of the movies. Again, like I said, when I was in Dharma school, I could not have cared less about Amita's light reaching us, surrounding us, grasping us, or transforming us, because also at the time, we didn't hear a lot about very specific doctrinal aspects of Jodo Shinshu, and when I did, it was probably in one ear and out the other. So I'd like to give a little bit of background and some context on how I got the ideas for this talk. But I'd say it's important to say, in college, I took a course which was a Japanese religious studies class in English, because I don't speak Japanese. And this was because I was allowed for my anthropology major, which I had a focus on cultural studies, to replace the 4 semesters of language with cultural classes due to being highly, highly learning disabled. So I chose East Asia and Japan, because I wanted to learn a little bit more about my own Japanese culture, which I didn't know much of. And Jodo Shinshu was 1/3 of this course section, the others being Zen and Shinto. So the teacher's like, okay, raise your hand who knows Zen. You know, almost everyone. Who knows Shinto? A good amount of us go like this. And because if you have learning disabilities, they teach you front and center. That's how you retain information. So front, middle seat, I'm in front of the teacher, and he says, who knows Jodo Shinshu? And I was like, yeah. And then I look around, and everyone's kind of looking like this scruffy guy that's like not very well dressed, because I was just wearing like workout clothes, and they're kind of holy and sweaty. Can't know about this thing, and these students look pretty smart. So I put my hand down, and the teacher's like, hey, stand up. You're Jodo Shinshu? And I was like, I think I am, but no one else raised their hand, so I'm thinking, no, probably not. And he's like, oh, if you're from California. I'm like, yeah. He's like, Southern California. I was like, no, the Bay Area. He's like, oh, there's probably your temples up there. I assume you are. And of course, I go home and I call my mom. I was like, hey, just want to make sure we're Jodo Shinshu, because it's going to come up in this class. And her and the professor were like, you will know everything about Jodo Shinshu. And I read what we read, and I was like, I don't think this guy knows what he's talking about, but he has a PhD. So I should just observe and try to figure this out, and don't raise your hand because you don't know what they're talking about. And I'm assuming, like many of you here, most of us don't get super familiar with the more doctrinal aspects of Jodo Shinshu. And of course, myself, I have some difficulty reading Master Shinran's work, and this is why I enjoy making comparisons to Star Wars. So I will admit, I cannot prove just how much George Lucas knows specifically about Jodo Shinshu from Joseph Campbell, but I have found that it's hard to find if you spend hours. You can find things that Joseph Campbell did study with, I think, Reverend Eickelman? One of the ministers that was from America who was a convert was a teacher with some high ranking at our school in Japan, and apparently Joseph Campbell's friend knew one of our ministers. So we can at least find that he studied in Kyoto for 3 months and was in talks with one of these minister-professor people. It's at least safe to say that the lore of Star Wars is likely influenced from some aspects of our religion and doctrinal ideologies. So if you know Reverend Dr. Jeff Wilson, who was BCA but now is in Canada teaching, we've had some pretty cool and interesting ideas and back and forths about Star Wars and Jodo Shinshu. And of course, me not being super academic or really smart, I never thought this is something that you would put together for a Dharma talk or a class. But again, it's because I took that film analysis class in one of the Christian schools that we were taught, use your fandoms to bring out why you think this can help teach people about your religion. So what I appreciate about Star Wars, and what I assume are references to Jodo Shinshu, again, is Joseph Campbell did write about our religion, and Lucas considers him to be his spiritual guide in life. Campbell also had a background in social sciences, and I believe that this influenced George Lucas's approach to storytelling, combining anthropology and philosophy to create the stories that we can hear and understand and watch today to help us reconsider what our own spirituality means to us. So we are observing EITAIKYO today and chanting in memory of loved ones who have passed. And I think it's important for us to recognize our own karmic ties or causes and conditions that led us to be here today so we can learn about Jodo Shinshu. So as we know, Amida's light and the name are the causes for our birth. And when we chant, we are doing a ritual that ties us to activities that our loved ones have done in the past. If we're able to look at the ritual in this way, we are able to take some comfort knowing that the same words we said today were also chanted by those who came before us. Perhaps this can be comforting for some of us, even if we don't like to chant, because it allows us to share space and something that can transcend time and physical space because they're not here with us today. But I believe that this activity can settle our minds to have more space to reflect on their memories, and I think this is similar in aspect to meditation. But the Gosandai, or Shinran's quote, also says, sorrowing at the plight of meditative and non-meditative practitioners and people of grave evil. So also want to throw out there, if you've seen Star Wars, you know who Darth Vader is, and at the end Darth Vader becomes a Force ghost, even though he had not trained in any of that. I take that as the 18th vow, that when we say the name and take refuge in the Buddha's infinite wisdom and compassion, we can also be part of the Pure Land. It's just the aspect of taking refuge. But that was just a little nerdy Star Wars thing. But we are talking about meditation. So do we know what our orthodox view is on meditation in Jodo Shinshu? It's okay if we don't. Yeah, okay. Some people. So academically, doctrinally, or orthodox-wise, we don't meditate in order to gain our own enlightenment. Now, you can take a hard stance on that and say, just never do meditation. I don't know if that's helpful because we at least know that meditation can be beneficial for our health. So we don't meditate for our enlightenment because we just say the name and we're taking karmic merit from Amida Buddha because that light is always reaching us. But something from anthropology has always stuck with me from college, and it's the idea that we tend to view the world through an ethnocentric view. Basically, we see the world how we've been taught up until that point, and that blinds us from being able to understand or appreciate or see truly what other people's cultures are doing. I was taught when you go into a culture, you're going to have perceived notions of other and separate, but when you learn the language, which I can't because learning disabilities, and living with them, you might come to see the actions or rituals at first you thought had nothing to do with you, might be viewed in a different way, and you can find similarities that maybe at the beginning you had not considered. I'd like for all of you to keep this in mind today. So again, we do not meditate for our own enlightenment. Rather, we could use the meditation as a function, and chanting might have some similar ends to a means in the fact that there's use functions, which I think is important to understand if you're going to study anthropology or chaplaincy. I found out right before I flew out that the new JSC building manager, Bob, was in India for about 2 months, and he was doing a 2-month training certification with the Indian government because in India, to teach yoga, the government has to certify you. And so they were talking about chanting, and it's, I believe in Hindi, I'm not 100% sure, and he told the guru, well, I'm Buddhist, so I do Buddhist chanting, but I wouldn't chant this outside of the yoga studio setting, and the guru was like, that's very good. So like you know, in this yogi practice, we wouldn't chant Buddhist chants. But I think, Bob, you should do your Buddhist chants because 10 minutes of any kind of chanting is the shortest activity you can do for centering your body. The next would be seated meditation. And the next, which was almost like an hour, is doing the actual yoga poses. So I know in the West, we tend to like to make things scientific, that I can rationalize why this is good for me because there's some science behind it. And instead of just doing it for the spiritual or religious or ritual purposes, but the chanting is actually peer-reviewed through the Indian doctors or someone. And so chanting today was actually good for your own physical health. But I'd like to also remind us that it is important as a ritual, and I believe there's spiritual benefits as well. I'm not going to downplay the role of meditation and other religious practices, and nor do I want to say that Jodo Shinshu is the only one way to practice Buddhism. We were taught in grad school that theology is a humanities, so there's ideas of keeping very strict and clear lines of boundaries between religious practices, and I understand that. It's so that we don't downplay either aspect of the religions. But from cultural anthropology, I think I try to find how activities, while they may seem different at first and come from different religious or ethnic or worldviews, if we're open to these kinds of things and not just make harsh judgments right off the bat, I think then as a people, we can bridge the groups, bridge gaps between the groups, and I think this is how all of us can better grow together. I think there are useful aspects, similar use functions for meditation, and of course it's a different Buddhist ritual, but again, there's functionalities that I think we can appreciate as we chant. Has anyone been chanting and then all of a sudden they zone out and they kind of come back in and you're on the right place in the right pitch, but you're like pages behind? Does that ever happen to anyone here? It happens, right? And somehow you weren't chanting the wrong thing. You just kind of go somewhere else. Is that not an aspect of meditation? For me personally, I think when I have to chant, because ministers have to chant, it helps me focus, get ready to focus on the Dharma talk that I'm about to hear. But because Jodo Shinshu is a type of Buddhism that relies on gratitude, I think after chanting, I'm a little bit more prepared to have an open mind and be settled and feel that gratitude like I talked about, to know, at least for me, how lucky am I that I was able to re-find our sect of Buddhism as an adult. We are also chanting Amida Buddha's name as others have in the past. And when we say the name, we are saying it in gratitude. In the ultimate sense of spirituality, we are acknowledging the benefit that we receive from Amida Buddha, the teachings, our karmic merit, but are we also not grateful for all of those who made it possible for us to be here to receive the teachings? Are we not contemplating the benefits we received from, again, of course, an ultimate sense of compassion, from both an enlightened being, but also, are we not reflecting in gratitude for being able to physically be able to step foot in the temple today and be here with each other and do the same rituals that our ancestors did before us? So the Dharma is constantly flowing to us from Amida Buddha. And I would argue, this is just my opinion, that it takes the love and compassion from others to teach us how to be actually truly grateful in this form of Buddhism, because if we just talk about the light and karmic merit comes from Amida, that's not super easy to comprehend. But I think we can appreciate the love and care that we get from our family members. I think it's easier for us as like Western people to rationalize we're physically here because of our families and past temple members. They've worked hard, they built the temple, they gave us a place to come to hear the Dharma, and in like a modern sense, people had to give birth to us. Someone, a minister or a teacher, a Dharma school teacher, had to teach us the Dharma. Someone has to run this temple, and of course all of this is true. Perhaps as the idea of the Buddha out there transmitting karmic light or energy to allow us to become enlightened, it's probably a stretch at first. And whether or not any of you want to take this as just a story with a good message, or something that actually happens, that's up to your individual understanding of the world, and I don't think either is wrong. Because either side that we take on this, there's a message of hope, which, Star Wars talks about, hope. We need to have something to take comfort in, and I think doing these rituals in the service can help us stop our busy lives and just be able to sit and reflect on how we were able to get to this seat that we're all sitting in today. Obviously, you continue to come because something about the temple, the community, the religion brings you back to here, and you keep coming because you get some sort of benefit out of it. The light what we receive represents the ultimate sense of benefit from Amida Buddha. So we take refuge, knowing we too will enter the great ocean of wisdom in which we were reminded at the end of Gosandai. So in closing, I know that I've talked a really long time. I'd like to geek out for any of the Star Wars fans out here and finish with some thoughts because of the slides, if you're open to these ideas. So I see the light of Amida Buddha being similar, not the same, but having some playover in the concept of the Force the Jedi interact with. So both have something that you feel and believe in, and yet, of course, the Force is not exactly like the light from Amida Buddha. Perhaps we can use this concept, if we're familiar with Star Wars, to help us get started in our own understanding of something coming to us and guiding us so we can grow our own spirituality. We, of course, don't become one with the Force. If we could, I would not do this, and I would go take a lightsaber and do whatever the Jedis would do. But Amida's light is the cause for our birth, like how Yoda is learning from Qui-Gon Jinn how to go to the Force to come back. I appreciated Reverend Smitty's description of the river with many tributaries, because as a kid, I didn't really imagine the Force as light per se, but I think in my mind as a child, the Force flowed around people like a stream. I feel this is similar with how I see our ancestors. They started perhaps at the top of the stream or in the mountains in a lake, and they start to come down, and at some point, they've just become the water, and yet that water continues down to us, or me, so we can get benefits as well. And I think that helps push us along the river of our spiritual journey in Buddhism. So Yoda is visited by his friend through the Force, and this concept of Force ghosts, if you're familiar with Star Wars, also makes me think about the idea that we have in Jodo Shinshu about the bodhisattvas that are returning from the Pure Land. So I'm not sure if everyone here knows this, but the idea in Jodo Shinshu is that when you die, you go to the Pure Land and you become one. You're sitting with Amida Buddha to become equal in aspect to Amida Buddha. But first, you become a bodhisattva. I think everyone here knows what a bodhisattva is, like kind of like enlightened beings, almost, but not quite. And doctrinally, the idea is that the bodhisattvas are now almost perfect, but instead of fully attaining their enlightenment, they come back to the earth to somehow guide others to come find the teachings of Jodo Shinshu, because again, like in the Gosandai, this religion's even for the people that are of evil making. In Jodo Shinshu, it doesn't matter how good you are or bad you are, as long as you appreciate that the light is there for you. The thought is that you'll start to transform and become something else, not because you can make yourself a good, holy, perfectly good person, but you'll have a change in perspective because you get something that you probably didn't fully deserve in like a kind of rational concept. And I think that starts to help us grow and evolve into something just a little bit better than we were before. So you can take the idea of the bodhisattvas going to the Pure Land and returning as something real, and it's happening in some spiritual shape or form. That's up for you to decide. Or it's also just a nice story that has meaning, that gives us guidance to our lives. And again, whether we take it as true or not true, or either side of this thing, even if it's just a good story to tell, I think we can at least in our memories view those who have passed before us, and we can picture them while we're chanting in the space that they also chanted at some point in their lives. And I hope, even if you don't like chanting, because that's okay, that makes the aspect of the service just a little bit more meaningful, and that helps us continue on in our own spiritual journeys. I'd like to thank you for your attention today and for inviting me and my wife to join all of you, and Reverend Smitty I was texting Smitty while on vacation, and I felt bad, but I just needed to know what I was doing. So in closing, would you please join me in Gassho? So Master Shan Tao, alone in his time, clarified the Buddhist true intent, souring at the plight of meditative and non-meditative practitioners and people of grave evil. He reveals that Amida's light and the name are the causes for birth. When the practitioner enters the great ocean of wisdom, the primal vow, they receive the diamond-like mind. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Das, Namo Das, Namo Das, Namo Das. Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei, for your message on EITAIKYO and the appreciation of those who have passed before us and who have added to the flow of the spiritual river that we are experiencing. Please rise for the Gatha Ondoksan 2. It can be found on the page 128 in your service book. Namam Dabs, Namam Dabs, Namam Dabs, Namam Dabs. Please be seated. Thank you for your presence today. Thank you to Reverend Mary Beth Smith for officiating today's service. Our guest speaker, Reverend Landon Yamaoka. Our musician, Robert Yamamoto. Our tech team, and for helping live stream today's service, and to Reverend Honda for ringing the kanshou. You're now invited to offer incense. Thank you. I realize I missed the closing meditation, but I think we're okay.